The Last of Us Part 2 released on June 19th, 2020. This is the highly anticipated sequel to one of my favorite games of all time, coming from my favorite game studio of all time, Naughty Dog. The Last of Us Part 2 continues the story in this post-apocalyptic world where death and brutality are customary, and it also acts as the second last PlayStation 4 exclusive before the arrival of the PS5. Unfortunately, months before the game's release, the story got leaked, and it flooded the internet and spawned controversy amongst fans. Even after release, it's safe to say that the fan base remains divided, mostly on the direction that the story took throughout the game, and to some extent the game as a whole. There are a lot of opinions online, so I thought I'd add just one more. Let's get into it. I'll start with the game's strengths. The first and maybe most noticeable feature of this game are the visuals. Naughty Dog has once again taken what feels like full advantage of the PS4 system, and the results are stunning, especially considering I'm playing on a base PS4, a machine that was made in 2013. Everything from how the buildings, to the cars, to the grass, to the character models, everything looks spectacular, and it's unlike any other game I've played. These amazing visuals are also consistent throughout all the environments. I can't remember looking at one part of a level and thinking it wasn't up to par with how the rest of the level or area looked. There are parts of this game that honestly look like they belong in a cinematic trailer for a game. Animations are also really nicely done. There's a lot of attention to detail here, like how Ellie's throwing animation changes depending on if she's like moving left out of cover or right out of cover or sort of stumbling forward. I think I heard some news about them using a different animation technique, and I don't know much about that, but it seems like it's paid off. A lot of the animations here are super fluid, and they flow into one another really seamlessly, and it adds a lot to this game. Some more little details are like when you upgrade your weapons. In the first game, when you would do it, there would just be sort of one generic animation playing, and you wouldn't be able to see what your character's doing with the gun on the working table. But in this game, if you upgrade a specific part of a weapon, you can see your character actually working on that part of the weapon, which, again, it's a super small touch, but I think it really adds a lot, and it builds a lot to the overall setting and feeling of the game, world building. So the game is super polished. I will say that the first game utilized film grain, and I think it worked pretty well for that title, but the film grain in this game is more distracting than anything. Turning around quickly can be hard on the eyes sometimes, and I think that is due to the film grain. And I don't know if the engine that they're using just kind of, that's how it renders its footage or the game and all of that, or if it's something that they added purposely afterwards as a sort of stylistic choice. But either way, I think the experience could be improved if the film grain was removed. It's just a bit too strong here, and it's pretty noticeable, especially in those sort of not dark but darker areas than regular. Moving on to the gameplay. I love the gameplay of the first game, and it's back here in the second. Admittedly, it could have seen more upgrades than what was there in the final product. It is still mostly the same gameplay, but I was still able to fully enjoy each encounter that I had. So, bricks and bottles are back. You can distract and stun enemies. Stealthing around is super satisfying, especially if you like doing that sort of stuff like I do. Melee combat is brutal and overall suspenseful. The music and the way the camera moves adds a whole level of immersion, in my opinion. I'm really sucked in and focused on the game during encounters, and that's not something every game can provide. The AI in this game really feels like it has a mind of its own. Even if you restart encounters 10 times over, and I've done that more than 10 times over for testing, it rarely feels like the enemies follow the same path when searching for you. In most games, when you're a couple hours in, you get the feeling for how the AI works. They become more predictable, you can kind of guess what path they're gonna go, and encounters can feel somewhat stale. I didn't feel like that playing The Last of Us Part 2. Enemies do pose a real threat here. This, in addition to flawless animations and beautiful visuals, I felt like I was playing a demo that you would see on E3. One of those demos that gets severely downgraded by the time of the final release. This game also has more terrifying sections than there were in the first game. I won't give away anything, but there are sections in the first game that were really well done, but could have been, but there could have been more sections like that in the first game. But they're here in the second, and they're really well done and super terrifying, and maybe my favorite parts of the gameplay here. That being said, if you didn't like the gameplay of the first game, you probably won't like it here either. I can understand why people would expect a bit more innovation, but for me personally, it worked. We're seeing games get 60 FPS modes and stuff like that on the PS5. You know, I don't know what their plans are for this game on PlayStation 5, but if they could just add a 60 FPS mode and an option to remove film grain, that's gonna be a hell of an experience. This game was a little odd when I was playing it first time around, as in the second cutscene, I was having character models T-posing and phasing through doors and things, and I couldn't even load some of my save files. I don't know if this was really a game issue or an issue with my hard drive on my PlayStation 4, because it's still that base PS4. But I was basically able to fix those issues by deleting the game and then reinstalling it on my hard drive. I don't know if it was a common issue, but I think it's worth mentioning. Other than that, this game performs pretty well. I don't recall any major frame rate drops or any asset pop in that was too much to break the immersion. It was definitely at a minimal. The time it takes to reload an encounter when you die is also super quick, but initially loading your save to load into the game, that can take a long time. It's not quite GTA 5 levels, but you might find yourself on your phone just waiting for the time to pass. And lastly, I feel like every game that I review here that's on PS4, I have to have a special section just for this, but this game will definitely make your PS4 just scream. There's no other way around it. I'd recommend playing this game with headphones or something, or so you don't have to hear the sound of your PS4, or just find a way to minimize that sound to get more immersed in the actual game. Alright, that's probably the part that everyone's been waiting for. The 3 people that are going to be watching this. Let's talk about the story and characters. And I won't be talking about any spoilers here. So the first half of the game, I mostly didn't have a problem with. Like I said before, in terms of a game perspective, it's really well crafted and it's a fun experience. And for the first 12 or 15 hours of the game, I was enjoying it. And this game, it took me 24 hours to beat it. So the first half of the game, I was enjoying. Not quite as much as the first game, but I was still, you know, I had more time to give it. I was willing to give it more time to see what it can do here. But even halfway through, I think this game's character problem already started to kind of show up. And so most of the characters that were introduced so far were really just boring and uninteresting and almost annoying. I don't think I really hated anyone, but there was no one that really caught my attention, or there's no one I cared for. I was indifferent about a lot of these characters. This game does pay respect to the first game in ways that I don't see people really mentioning, because these are really small things now, but maybe it's just something I appreciate more. But a lot of the sort of inside jokes and references between Joel and Ellie in the first game are somehow brought back and referenced here, and that's a really small touch, but as a giant fan of the first game, I really, that was something really cool to see. It's around the halfway point where a new set of characters is introduced, and now it starts to feel like the writing is it's just starting to feel sloppy. I don't know what was happening in the writing room, but the game starts to kind of fall apart here for me. The game so obviously wants you to like certain characters, but it goes about it in the complete wrong way. And even when one of those characters does something that you can respect, or does something that can make you understand what they're struggling with and be rooting for them almost, the next cutscene, it will have the character doing the most absurd out-of-character shenanigans, or will do something else that takes that respect that you got for them back. It's like this game can't really decide what it wants some of these characters to be. And then, worst part is, by the end of the game, I don't feel like I can relate to anyone. This game had me feeling alienated from its entire cast. And when you can't relate to a characters in more emotional and more important parts of the game, especially a story-driven game, that really breaks the immersion, and it can shatter the experience. It can shatter how into the game you are. And it's a big problem with a game that's more story-driven. I think when people talk about not being immersed, they a lot of times it's more gameplay things and things like of that nature. I don't remember the last game I played where the story was so, I felt so disconnected from a lot of these characters, where I just, when a scene is supposed to get emotional, I don't feel anything, and it ruins it for me. The ending in this game is boring, useless, unsatisfying, and admittedly, it might be for the sake of telling a more poetic story, but that doesn't justify it in my opinion, and it doesn't make it better. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't do justice to what, the 24 hours you played, and it ultimately feels cheap. It feels like the game does certain things with its story and characters because, oh, we're The Last of Us. We have to be dark, gritty, and depressing, right? A lot of the charm from the first game, I don't find any of that here. Another thing I didn't like was how the first game featured a lot of different environments, and it felt like a journey, and I liked seeing and exploring things a bit more. But this game really only has one sort of environment, and that does get old after a while, and I felt like I was just a bit less inclined to explore these areas, which can be big areas, and they're really impressive for, a single-player story-driven game, but it just got a bit stale after a while. I think there should have been a bit more variety to the levels at times. Alright, well, to sum it all up, it's certainly a well-crafted game, but the characters and story fall flat, and they don't hold up to the first game, which is one of my favorite games of all time. It's a good game. It's a disappointing sequel. I suspect that anyone that didn't play the first game, didn't like the first game, or just played the first game casually and just sort of said, yeah, it's a good game, I feel like anybody who fits in those categories would probably like this game, or like the story of this game at least, because I don't see how a hardcore fan of I was gonna say series, but I don't see how a hardcore fan of the first game could be fine with the story of this one. So yeah, I suspect those three categories that I mentioned before that people fall into, I feel like those are the people that really like this game. But that's my theory, my game theory, if you will.
Hello, Internet. Welcome to Game Theory.
If I was to replay this, I would have to turn my brain off and just play it for the gameplay. I can't be bothered to go through that, sort of experience that story again. I just don't want to do it. At the end of the day, Naughty Dog is probably still my favorite studio. I haven't, lost hope in them or anything like that. I personally would like to see them tackle a new IP. I think it's pretty obvious that they're done with Uncharted. And after this game, I want to see something new. I don't want to see The Last of Us Part 3. I really don't care anymore. So for those that don't know, I rate a game like it's taking a test, basically. So anything below a 50% is a fail. And I also give my opinion on what price you should be paying for this game here. I want to give this game like a 65%. And like the inner fan in me really wants to give that. But I can't ignore the good that is there. So to me, this game's a 70%. I'd give it a 70%. In terms of what price I think it's worth, I don't think it's worth full price. I don't think any game that's half good in its story is worth full price. But there is a lot of content here. Again, a 24-hour story that I think is worth a second playthrough just for the gameplay. Playing it on Grounded or, the highest difficulty or something like that. I feel like that can be a lot of fun. And so if it takes you 24 hours again, even though you know where to go, but encounters are harder, I think it's safe to say this could be, you could get almost 40 or 50 hours out of this. Unless you really hate the story. But yeah, it's probably worth that second playthrough. And if you're looking for great visuals and immersive gameplay, similar to what they had in the first game, I think it's worth waiting for a 25 or 50% off sale. This is me officially signing off. Thanks for watching.